Hey everyone, Davey Blackburn here. Just want to take a moment to personally invite you to our book launch event that we're holding August 1st in Indianapolis, actually right outside of Indianapolis, at this beautiful venue called the Sixpence in Whitestown, Indiana. I'm telling you, this is going to be an unbelievable night. It's going to be so sacred. Actually, it turns out that August 1st, we didn't really necessarily plan for it this way, but August 1st it was my wedding anniversary with Amanda. When we had a double wedding with her sister Amber and our brother-in-law Gavin. And so it's just gonna be a beautiful, beautiful time to celebrate Amanda, her life, her legacy, the message of nothing is wasted. And so many of you guys have asked, why have we not done any in-person events for Nothing is Wasted, like meetups and stuff like that? Well, because we have been reserving it for this particular season of launching the book to bring our Nothing is Wasted family together for the very first time. We thought that would be just such a commemorative time to do that. So you don't want to miss it. You can get tickets online right now. They are filling up fast. So make sure you go get your tickets. Make an entire weekend out of it. It's a Thursday night. You can spend a few more days in the city. If you've never experienced Indianapolis, it's a beautiful place to visit, especially at the end of summer, August kind of time. It's just absolutely gorgeous. So make sure you come out. You can have, there's general admission tickets. There's VIP tickets. General admission gets everything from that 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock time frame where we have creative storytelling, live worship. We're going to be doing some documentary stuff. There's an exclusive conversation that I have with Levi Lesko, who wrote the foreword of the book. You're not going to want to miss that. There is a live podcast recording with Daniel and Brittany Brooker right there in person. You get to be a part of the very first live podcast recording of Nothing is Wasted podcast, Nothing is Wasted Ministries. And then VIPs get in an hour early where they're going, I can't describe this immersive book experience that you're going to have, but you do not want to miss it. VIPs get that. You get some vouchers for the food trucks. You get so many, there's just so many great perks. You can go to nothingiswastedbook.com to see all the details about this launch event. Just follow that link that says launch event, and you'll be able to see the landing page for all the details about the launch event. August 1st in Indianapolis. Make sure you get your tickets as soon as possible because it is filling up fast, and we want you to be a part of this special sacred night as we celebrate releasing the message of nothing is wasted into the world. Would love to meet you there. Would love to shake your hand. Would love to give you a big old hug and just tell you personally, thank you for being a part of our Nothing is Wasted family. August 1st, make sure you're there. Hello, welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. I am one of your hosts, Davey Blackburn, and joining me, Aubrey Sampson, our other host. Aubrey, so good to be with you this week.
Always good to be with you. And I love this sort of arc of episodes that we're in because it's all book related. It's all Davey Blackburn related. It's all Amanda Blackburn related. So this is really, really special. And today's guest is this your therapist?
This was my counselor. This was
Come on.
Dr. John Walker. He is the first counselor that I saw, which was interesting, that was not Dr. John Walker. It was about 2 weeks after Amanda passed away, and I sat in front of a counselor, and he said, when I laid out what had happened, he said, I don't know how to help you. I'm like,
wow.
Oh, okay. What does that mean? So, and I think it was all in good intention. He was basically like,
I'm not
hey,
equipped for this.
This is a really heavy thing that you just walked through, and I'm not sure I'm equipped for this.
That must have been quite vulnerable, though, to have put yourself out there and then kind of go, oh, what?
Yeah, it left me feeling a little bit defeated, a little bit shocked, a little bit like this is really that bad, And I think I was still in the stages and phases of shock that, it didn't really all set in for me.
Wow.
But yeah, that was my first experience with a counselor. And so you imagine how that colored,
it's probably hard to try again, right?
Right. But so fortunately then a month after Amanda passed away, I went to Chicago, of all places. Aubrey went to Chicago.
Yep, love it. Love this city.
Yep. Met Bob Goff there for an event. He invited me to come up, and he invited me to be at a speaking event to just kind of like stay below the radar. Interestingly enough, he ended up not keeping me below the radar at that event. In typical Bob Goff fashion, he kind of just pulled an audible right there. And by the end of that event that he was speaking at this large church in Chicago, he had basically the entire audience like hoist me up and like in a really beautiful way, like have me crowd surf to represent like the body of Christ carrying me through this whole thing, and they were praying over me. So it was just like a beautiful thing.
That's so Bob Goff.
Yeah, it really is. But so it
Wow.
was a little bit kind of like, oh wow, unnerving. But at that event,
Mm,
then the pastor of that church, he was like, hey, I want to connect you with my counselor. Well,
cool.
that counselor happened to be the same exact counselor of at the time the pastor that preached Amanda's funeral and the one that I had been serving under for several years, who launched
Yeah.
us, Pastor Perry Noble. He is
Yeah.
since not, he's not the pastor of New Spring Church anymore, but
Yeah.
that was his counselor too. So it
No
just so happened
way.
that they had the same counselors.
Wow.
And I just knew it was a God thing. When this guy, Pastor Tim Harlow, was like, I want to send you to my counselor. I'll
Yeah.
take care, I'll pay for it. I
Come
was like,
on.
wow, this is crazy. So he sent me down in March of that year. So that would have been in December. So then the following March.
Okay.
So now we're like 3 or 4 months after everything has happened. He
Yep.
sends me
Yep.
down for like an intensive with Dr.
Mm.
John Walker.
Wow.
And it was
Oh,
amazing. And it was exactly the time that I needed it. I think I
yeah.
needed all that winter to
Yeah.
really process through a lot of it myself,
Mm-hmm.
to like let a lot of grief come out. And by that
Mm-hmm.
point had gotten connected with Pastor Levi Lesko. He had talked me
Yeah.
through the run toward the roar. I'd
Yeah.
gone back into the house, so I'd confronted a lot of things that were haunting me up to that
Yeah.
point, and
Yeah.
was able to really meet with the Holy Spirit on so many of these things,
Yeah.
that now I was ready for someone to sit across the table from me and
Mm.
kind of give me some hard truth and some hard
Wow.
reality, like a
Wow.
skilled surgeon,
Yep.
essentially,
Yep.
to be
Yep.
able to cut me open and go, hey, let's talk about this. Like,
Mm.
what might God be doing in this as you've
Mm.
walked through this? And it
Wow.
was so profound. I mean,
I'm
life
sure it
altering,
was. I'm
obviously.
sure it was.
So I enjoyed my time with John Walker so much that week. Later that next month, he actually was on my trip to Israel that I went with. I went to um, with the New Spring group.
Wow.
And so I
That's
write about the
amazing.
trip to Israel in the book, and you see some really profound things that happened there, like where God met me.
Mm.
But he and his wife were on that trip incidentally.
No
So now I
way.
had this like, here's my counselor, but then also while I'm like taking this healing journey through Israel, my counselor's right there.
That's
And
amazing.
it was just
Only
really
God
like
can do
God
that.
ordained,
Yeah.
lined it all up.
Only
And
God can do
then
that.
eventually
Mm.
we brought Dr. John Walker and his daughter Charity up to do like an intensive with our entire staff at the church,
Oh, that's
just to kind of
amazing.
walk through
Yeah.
healing for
This,
us and
because this is a
leadership. And
collective grief
it
you're
was all,
sharing,
yeah, it's
losing
all of us.
Amanda.
So he's been very
Wow.
instrumental in our healing journey. He has since
Mm.
retired. But I'm just really grateful that we have been able to have this conversation with him, and you guys get a little insight into his
Oh,
wisdom and why it was so
yeah.
pivotal for me.
Oh,
So,
I cannot wait for our Nothing is Wasted community to take a listen. I don't want you to, give away any of the episode yet, Davey, but was there just anything that really stands out from your time together with him? Even maybe one thing.
well, yeah, I think the way, maybe the methodology of what he did,
Mm,
the first day it was just like verbal vomiting. I just like dumped all
mm,
over him, right?
wow.
But then the second day, it's like he took all of that, and then the next day he presented something to me. And he said, I've spent some time, looking over and like just all the stuff we've talked about.
Yeah.
Excuse me, all the stuff we talked about. And he said, I've got like a few things that I just feel like we want to draw up out of this. And I've still got those notes. Like I have, because and it's
That's
just it was
amazing.
so profound the way he kind of took all of this stuff that I dumped on him, took it home, prayed through it, asked the Lord, what are you wanting? What are
Mm,
you doing in Davey right now? What do
wow.
you want me to draw out of him here?
Yeah.
And it was incredibly profound. I think one of the
Mm,
biggest things he said, we'll talk about this in the conversation, but he said, Davey, the wrong fight is trying to make life easy. That's the wrong battle. People are always trying to make life easy.
mm.
He said the right battle is to live well in a difficult world.
Whoa. Come
And
on.
that really changed, it really reframed things for me, that in this world we will have trouble. And so
Yeah.
what does it look like for us as believers, no matter what
Mm,
happens to us, to live well?
mm. Wow.
One,
Oh,
that's possible. Like it's possible for us to live well,
yeah.
that it's possible for us to have an abundant life,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
Jesus said. Like that is not predicated on like life being good.
Yeah. He
He just said, I've come that you can have a full life, an abundant
Mm,
life.
mm.
And But the enemy, and this is kind of our warning in this, he's come to steal, kill, and destroy. And so
Yeah.
he's the one that wants to get us stuck and paralyzed in our pain.
Right. Right.
And we can live well in this difficult world. And that actually is a beautiful testimony when we do.
Mm. Oh man. Well, if that's just a little glimpse of the conversation we're going to hear, I cannot wait. So let's go ahead and take a listen to Davey's conversation with Dr. John Walker.
Well, Dr. John Walker, this is a long time coming. I've been waiting for years to have this conversation with you.
Outstanding. Well, I'm delighted to connect with you, Davey.
Well, I've talked about you to our Nothing is Wasted community way more than what you would probably even know. What everybody knows that's listening to this, if they have been around Nothing is Wasted any matter of time, is that you are the counselor that essentially walked me through the most pivotal portion of my healing journey in the most unimaginable loss that I've ever or other people can imagine going through, and that's losing Amanda. I would love to talk a little bit about that. People are going to be here as we're talking about this. They're going to be starting to read the book. They're going to see some of the chapters of our time together and your wisdom as you poured it out. But first, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us about what you do now in your retirement as you're quote unquote retired, but still doing a bunch of stuff. Just tell us a little bit about what life looks like for you now.
Sure. Well, I'll give just a little bit of background information in that my wife Deanna and I, and we will be married for 49 years next week. So we started a not-for-profit organization back in the early 90s called Blessing Ranch. And we describe it as a Christian leader resource and renewal center. So our job was just to take care of pastors. And where am I at now? So I retired kind of, sort of, about 5 years ago. And my bad attempt at humor is if you ever plan on retiring, make sure your daughter doesn't become your boss. Because when she asks, I say yes. And so I do anything I can to support Blessing Ranch kind of from the sidelines. And it is pretty fun to have actually our daughter, Charity, running the organization. And she's the CEO and the lead psychologist and does everything that I used to do. So that's Blessing Ranch a little
I guess the only thing worse than having your daughter be the CEO over the organization you started is your wife, because that's the only person you can't say no to anymore. So at least you skirted around Deanna doing it, and now it's Charity that's doing it.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, I'd love to hear how back in the 90s when you guys you decided to start doing that. What led you to that? Why did you decide, man, we want to be a safe haven, a place for pastors?
Sure. Do you want the 3-minute overview or the 3-hour story?
Probably.
I think it's pretty clear.
3 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. The way I can say it, Davey, is it was a direct call from God. You know how a lot of people tell God stories, and then at the very end of the God story, like if God spoke, they make a fast disclaimer, like so many various denominations, so on and so forth, and say, oh, I didn't hear an audible voice. Well, I heard an audible voice. And I quit apologizing for that 30 years ago. And so what God said, Deanna and I were getting ready to buy a family ranch in Texas. We were both in Houston working. And literally God said, John, don't buy a family ranch. I need you to build a Christian leader resource and renewal center.
Wow.
And that was about 10 minutes before I was going to get up to speak, to preach. Just a little family worship because my father was ill and couldn't go out to worship. And so blew me so much away that told my family all about it. And that just became the journey to figure out what's next. Because what we say is the calling was clear, but it did not come with a blueprint.
Yeah. Wow.
And there's reasons for that. That maybe we'll get into, maybe we won't. But yeah, that's where it all began, was just from a very direct call from God. And he's so blessed the organization. To this point, we've probably dealt somewhere north of about 4,000 pastors.
Wow.
And, the organization continues to grow and make a difference in people's lives, particularly pastors.
Yeah. Man. Well, in my own journey, there were a couple of pastors that said, John Walker quite literally saved my life in ministry and marriage. And it was so divine the way that God connected me to you. And I was so apprehensive going down there for that week. But man, it just absolutely floored me, the wisdom that came out of your mouth. I want to share a couple of things that, I've repeated John Walkerisms over and over and over the past 7 to 8 years. And so some people may think that, I'm the brilliant mastermind behind it. I have to attribute it to you in all the respects. But one of the things that as you were helping me walk through tragedy, and as you've helped so many people, you said this thing to me. You said, you can't selectively numb. And I'd love for you to explain that a little bit. Dive into that, because I know you've worked with so many pastors, people who the temptation is to just form coping mechanisms.
Yeah, well, that's a place to start. Is there's a lot of different coping mechanisms. One of them is just going numb. Don't feel it. Just whatever the thing is out there that we're trying to cope with is so overwhelming, so catastrophic, that everything wants to just shut down to stop the pain and stop the chaos, stop the ambiguity, stop the hurt. And if you could selectively numb, then that wouldn't be too bad of a strategy. Right. But, the way it works is if you cut off the bottom part, all the awful, you also cut off the top part, the joy, the connection with people, the want to, the desire, all the stuff that's pretty healthy. And so in some respects, I wish selective numbing worked, but it doesn't. So if you choose to numb, instead of kind of walking through the wilderness, you'll cut the top off too. And that's a problem. Because then we stop living and, stop living well.
Well, dive into that a little bit more. What are the implications and consequences for cutting the bottom off and cutting the top off? You've seen so many, like you said, mostly pastors come through your office, but a lot of people, and there are a lot of people who are not living well. They're living in a different respect. So what would you say those, as you were to unpack the implications, what you've seen?
I'll just name a few. It won't be an exhaustive list, but if you cut off, the top and the bottom, creativity goes. So your brain is now numb. So the ability to think critically, the ability to do self-management, manage your emotions, the ability to have some kind of self-discipline, simply the ability to enjoy. And life is tough enough, but if you cut the top and bottom off and you get none of the good stuff, then one of the implications is it just keeps getting worse. Now, here's the deal. It keeps getting worse, but you're usually the last person to know that. The reason being, because you don't have the ability to kind of reflect, because your brain is numb, your body is numb, your creativity is numb, your thoughtfulness is numb, everything's numb. And so, the downward spiral can be slow and insidious, or it can be a rapid crash, one way or the other. So to me, that's the biggest implication of all of this is you don't know how much you've lost in going completely numb until you start to get some of it back. Then the analogy would be like, people that work really hard, and they just never take any time off. They don't know how flat they've become. They just are doing what they do, and they're kind of describing that as their normal at the time, but then they take a break and all of a sudden creativity starts coming back, the ability to think and so many of the higher order functionings start to come back. And then the aha moment is, wow, I had no idea that I was so flat or so numb, because it just, unfortunately, over time becomes normal.
Yeah.
And, I was never very good at taking breaks. And I remember I took a sabbatical in 2016 where
we went to Israel,
joined up in Israel. And when I got back, that was a 3-month break. Again, poor me, 3 months in Europe. I know, but somebody had to sacrifice to do that. And when I came back, that was one of my biggest aha moments. Like, wow, I feel like I can think again, particularly like on the creative side, and so on and so forth. And it's just a big surprise for a lot of people that when they've numbed the top and the bottom, no selective numbing, you wind up defining a new normal that's not so good.
Wow. Well, speaking of, one of the other things you taught me, and I know this is something that you teach pastors, especially because, believe me, I know pastors have a tendency to not care for themselves, to not really look after their own and soul care. They're caring for everybody else. And so they take this mindset of like, okay, we're just going to crush it. We're just going to go, like what you said.
Right.
People in general have a tendency to do that with our culture today, right? Where it's just, we're keeping up Mach 6, and especially in pain, when we find yourself in some kind of season of trauma, what I've found can happen is that you either fall into one of two ditches. You fall into the like wallow ditch. You fall into the work hard ditch. Those are the two ditches. Let's talk about that work hard one, because another John Walkerism that I've borrowed is the idea of self-care is not selfish. If Jesus is in the center of it, it's actually good stewardship. I'll never forget you telling me that. And it was a paradigm shift for me. Talk about that a little bit, why that's so important.
Well, the idea of self-care when you're a hard worker, a go-getter, can seem pretty unappealing because you're just cranking it out. And you run at a high level and a high pace, and you don't feel sorry for yourself. And so when people say to you, hey, why don't you think about taking a little bit better care of yourself, you don't ever say it out loud, but the subtext somewhere around here is, nah, because that's only for wimps. That's for people who aren't very tough. That's for people who don't have any capacity to manage themselves. And then it's kind of like in our previous conversation, there's a lot we wind up losing that we don't even realize we're losing. Yeah. And so we disregard self-care. And certainly self-care can be very selfish.
Yeah.
But that's why we got to insert that middle part. If Jesus is the Christ, and if Jesus is Lord, then self-care is actually good stewardship, because you can continue to do what Jesus has called you to do. Rather than it either declining or getting burned out or just, becoming annoyed and angry with the works of ministry or life.
Right.
And so I think it is a redefinition for a lot of people who work hard to think, oh, what I'm doing with self-care is I'm getting an oil change, I'm adjusting the carburetor, I'm having the engine tuned, all those sorts of things which we do in other areas of life. And I'm oversimplifying with an automobile illustration, but the point is the same.
Yeah.
That we take care of so many of other things. And we also, I think this is important, we also see other people misusing self-care. And that's their excuse to not work hard, to not push through in hard times, to try to make whatever it is just as easy as possible, and oversimplify. So, you got to define self-care correctly, but it is a huge paradigm shift, like you say, for many people when they figure out, oh, this is so I can really keep doing what I'm doing effectively. And it's not about self. It's about continuing to give, continuing to do, continuing to sacrifice, and not getting to the point where you've let yourself digress so far that, things like ministry sound like a really bad idea, or investing heavily in life. And I mean a godly life is just like, whatever.
Right.
So it really is important for everybody, but particularly important for people like yourself who know how to really work hard and, like you say, crush it and do it. And so another one of those coping mechanisms can just be busyness.
Yeah.
And the way, if you don't go numb, another way is you could just go busy. And as long as you just stay crazy busy and don't think about anything and don't self-manage and don't do self-care and all that kind of stuff, then everything's all right. Well, in reality, it's not.
Yeah, that's so good. What's really difficult is trying to discern or delineate in that tension of Jesus being the center of it. Because you're right, you can take self-care to the nth degree. And believe me, I have friends or people I watch their life laid out on Instagram, and they are all for self-care. That's like the biggest thing that they're a proponent for. And I look at it and I'm like, it almost seems like you're not doing anything to really accomplish anything for the kingdom or to push back darkness. But then you have people on the other side of the gamut that it's like, do you ever step back and take a break? And they're like, no days off. The devil doesn't take a day off, so why should I? But what's hard to delineate is like, where's the right tension there? And you put the critical key in there as long as Jesus is in the center. But again, that can also feel very subjective. Are there ways that you could help us go like, here's how to evaluate this. Here's how to assess whether you're managing that properly in terms of the self-care.
Yeah, the 60,000 foot overview is, who's it all about? Is it all about me, or is it all about Jesus? And if it's all about Jesus, that means I'm going to take care of myself so I can keep doing what I'm doing, be faithful to my calling, accomplish as much in the power of the Spirit that can be accomplished.
Yeah.
And so this is where the language is going to get a little crazy, but I hope it'll make sense. If self-care has been elevated to the be-all, do-all, and is-all, then that can be an idol of self.
Yeah. Wow.
It's all about me. Well, again, that's why I say that the differentiation is it about me or is it about Jesus?
Yeah.
And healthy self-care versus unhealthy self-care. Healthy self-care is, I'm not going to elevate myself to the top of the hierarchy. I'm going to keep Jesus there. But in the world we live in, self-care is primarily about, don't ask me to do anything hard in our culture. Don't ask me to do anything hard. Don't ask you to make any kind of sacrifice. Don't ask me to go the extra mile or do above and beyond, because that's not good for me. And what they don't even realize, a lot of people that I've talked with over the years don't realize, is that they have over elevated the position of self. And, one of the phrases I love to pull out of the Bible is, don't let anything, this is in the NLT, don't let anything take God's place in your heart.
Wow. Yeah.
Anything. Well, we can put self-care up there, but then that's unhealthy self-care. So the intention of self-care is to not try to make life easy. It's impossible. You can't make life easy. It's not about, I can no longer be inconvenienced. And you can't have it be an overreaction to like burnout or something like that, to where now the world revolves around me. And so keeping that differentiation, that at the apex of our life, you ask yourself the question, is this all about me, or is this all about me stewarding self, all the gifts, all the energy, all the abilities God has given me, so I can continue to do them, and I don't wind up as a casualty of life or a casualty of ministry, and to not take care of yourself at all, or to over evaluate how important you are, and all of life is about self-care, misses the sweet spot.
Yeah.
And the sweet spot's in the middle, where it's self-care, yet I'm willing to sacrifice. It's self-care, but I'm willing to go the extra mile. I'm willing to stay up late and get up early because that helps establish the goal or whatever it might be. But there's a rhythm to that. And another New Testament language, it's the unforced rhythms of grace. That's in the Message paraphrase. And when you find the unforced rhythms of grace, then you can do that ebb and flow of, I need to take a break.
Yeah.
But then, that comes back to homeostasis, and, you crank it out and you do it. And then you find out, I probably need to take a break, or I've fallen a little lower than I know how to do. But self doesn't get elevated to be the only point. I think actually that's the original sin of self, is with Adam and Eve. They ate the apple and they disobeyed. None of that's in debate. But what's underneath that, if you look below the surface, is an elevation of self. So this is what makes sense to me. The apple looks good.
Yeah.
I think it would be good to taste. And besides, there's this dude whispering in my ear saying, you know what, you'll even be like God. And so self-generated ideas and ideas that are about self wind up taking priority.
Wow.
And that becomes toxic. And again, a lot of times we don't realize that because we have a culture around us that actually prioritizes that. If it's good for me, it's good.
Right. Well, you've alluded a couple times to the fact that, we can be very unaware of some of these things ourselves, which I know you're biased. I'm also biased, but this would lead me to believe this is why counseling, finding a third party, is so important in the midst of our stories, whether we're in crisis or whether we're in, maybe you call it caution. No matter the season that you're in, it's important to have a counselor. Can you unpack that? I mean, you've spent your life's work to be a counselor to people. Why is that so imperative that we have that in our lives? Hey friends, it is your last chance to get all the incredible pre-order bonuses for Nothing Is Wasted, the book. If you order before July 30th, you'll get over $300 worth of bonuses with immediate access to chapters 1 and 2 of the book, 5 Nothing Is Wasted mini courses, such as Position for Redemption and How Do I Hear God's Voice, as well as the Pain to Purpose Toolkit and the first video of the Nothing Is Wasted small group short film series that we're going to be releasing later this fall. But you got to hurry if you want to get these exclusive offers. This offer is only good if you pre-order the book. So grab a copy of Nothing Is Wasted wherever you buy your books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and then head over to nothingiswastedbook.com to claim your bonuses. Now, even if you don't intend to claim the pre-order bonuses, I want to ask you to do us a favor by pre-ordering the book. Let me tell you what happens when you pre-order the book. It tells all the sales distribution channels like Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Books A Million. It tells them how many books they need to keep in stock so that when the book does release, they don't run out of stock. What I've had happen with some of my author friends is they come to release day or a week after release day, and there's no more stock left because people waited to buy their book for when it came out. It's the Amazon Prime phenomenon. And then because people didn't pre-order it, they didn't know how many to keep in stock. And then it's like 2-3 weeks even before they can restock the Amazon and Barnes & Noble so that people can actually get their book. So we don't want to have that happen. We don't want to get into an out of stock situation. So if you're planning on getting the book, please go over and pre-order it so that they know how many books to have in stock for when this releases on July 30th. And then while you're at it, you might as well pick up all of the bonuses that we have for you for pre-ordering the book, okay? I cannot wait to get this book in your hands, and I cannot wait for you to read the story that started it all here at Nothing is Wasted Ministries. And I know that you're going to be impacted in your own story as you see the way that God really walked me through my story and how you begin to see that with God, nothing is wasted. Go to nothingiswastedbook.com to pre-order your book today.
Good counseling is about gaining understanding. And often it takes someone outside of our own brain to speak into it to help us deeply consider something that actually might be counterintuitive. You know? And, not all the ways of God are counterintuitive, but many are.
Yeah.
And so if you're isolated in life and nobody is speaking into your life, then again, I'll steal from the Old Testament. You can do what seems right in your own eyes. You know how Israel was described on more than one occasion. They just did what was right in their own eyes. And we can fall victim to that. And so, not everybody has to go to counseling if you've got a group of people around you that can actually speak into your life. But I've found that really good counseling can shorten the process, the timeline to understanding. Again, if it's really good counseling, shorten the timeline to understanding, to be able to gain a perspective that might actually be counterintuitive, but healthy, that winds up bringing out the best in you. And again, bad counseling can wind up bringing out the worst in you, or worldly wisdom can bring out the worst in you. But the whole point would be somebody speaking into your life is pretty essential. I mean, in its best form, you could take preaching as one way our lives are spoken into. But, usually we're one of 100 in an audience or one of 1,000 in an audience. And so you get the general themes. Now, I know the Holy Spirit can mediate that and bring it into specific application. But there's nothing like, and again, think about for your listeners, think about the best conversation you've had in your life where there was that aha moment where you went, I never thought of it that way. If you want to take 3 or 4 minutes, I can tell a good story about
please
that.
do. Please do.
Well, this is out of my own life, and I've got to go back to 1976.
Okay.
And I'm in a seminary class, and in this, it's a seminary class on counseling, and there was you could pick one of 2 major semester assignments in the semester to do. One was present a verbatim of a counseling session, meaning a word-for-word accounting. Whoever the person you're counseling is says this is what you said, back and forth, on and on. And then it gets presented to the whole class, and they all tell you to tear you to pieces because you did such an awful job. Or the other one is do what's called hop in the fishbowl. And the hopping in the fishbowl means the whole class is seated around. There's 2 chairs in the middle. You, the student, myself, became the counselee, and you choose the counselor of your choice. And you have to talk about a real life problem.
Wow.
I didn't have a choice. I wasn't counseling anybody. And it sounded like a really bad idea to sit in the middle of this room and talk about something for real. Well, I started talking about my insecurity and my inadequacy and my inferiority. And I chose as my counselor the professor, Dr. Parmenter, very cool guy, one of those really good guys that could speak into your life. Yeah. And he listened to my tale of woe for a while. And again, I'm trying to illustrate, you gotta sometimes have somebody speak into your life to give you a different perspective. Yeah. Mel, here's my point. After listening to me for, I don't know, a few minutes, 8 or 10 minutes maybe, he just kind of folded his hands and he nodded his head a few times like this. And he said, John, have you ever thought to repent of those feelings? I'm not kidding. I'm not exaggerating. I was so dumbfounded by that question that I could not speak.
Wow.
It's kind of like, you're wrong if you do, you're wrong if you don't. If I say, oh no, I never thought of that. Well, why not? Stupid. or if you did think about that, then why haven't you done it? Yeah. You know? And so I was just dumbfounded. I mean, I couldn't talk. And literally, again, not exaggerating, we sat there in silence for probably 5 minutes.
Wow.
And I think finally he took mercy on me and said, gee, John, I'm wondering why you never ask me why I think you need to repent of your inferiority and inadequacy. And I'm like, okay, gee, Dr. Parmenter, why do you think I should repent of these things? And he said, okay, well, you're telling me you're inferior. Let's start with the conceited person. And he said, here's what the conceited person basically says through their words and actions. Hey, look at me and look at what I can do. And isn't the consequence of that they draw attention to themselves? And then he said, and what do you call that in biblical terms? And at that point, I knew the answer, but I also knew where this conversation was going. And I said, okay, you call it pride. And he said, that's right. And I'm just dying inside because I know. He said, okay, well, let's do the inferior person now. What does the inferior person says? Hey, look what I can't do. And what's the consequence of that? Draws attention to self. And what do you call that? Oh, no. Wow. What do you call that in biblical terms? Pride. And I got to tell you, I was probably 21 years old. And I haven't forgotten that.
Wow.
Because number one, it was accurate. But number two, everything started to make sense, because I knew that in my inadequacy, I was kind of self-centered. Because my brain was always on, what are the implications of that for me? Is this going to make me look stupid, silly, on and on? And so it was shocking for me.
Wow.
It was a life changer. You mentioned some of the things that have been life changers for you, simple phrases that have been used, paradigm shifts. Well, I think that started me on since, 1976, what is that, 48 years? Yeah. A 48-year journey of repentance of my pride. Wow. Now, take that one conversation out of my life, and I know God could have gotten me there otherwise. But you know what? That was so profound.
Yeah.
And that was so impactful that it made a difference, a huge difference in my life.
Wow.
And I hate to think of where I would be without that one conversation. Again, I know God could have gotten me there other ways, but he chose to get me there at that point, in that moment, and at that time of my life.
Wow. Man, and that's what counseling can do for us. A good counselor.
Yeah, a good counselor.
Can be a reflector there to help us to see how we might be seeing the world, seeing God, seeing ourselves inaccurately. And we're so caught up in what's the phrase? We can't see the forests through the trees or something like that because we're so emotionally caught up in our own storm We need someone who's an outside perspective, unbiased and subjective, to be able to hold that mirror up. And, you did that for me, Dr. Walker. I mean, that was such an important week for me in March of 2016 when I went down there. I remember the first counselor that I saw right after everything happened. And that person looked at me when I shared what had just happened and what I was feeling. And they said, I don't think I can help you. And I was like, wait, what? It was so disorienting. I'm like, am I that bad? You know?
Yeah.
And I know that, my story is very extreme. But I always like to, unemphasize that because so many people have gone through very extreme things. I hear stories and I go, wow, I can't imagine going through that. Just like when someone hears my story, they say the same thing. You've experienced, I'm sure, so many extreme stories that have come into your office. I'm curious, a couple of things, if we can settle in this for a moment, and we look at that almost from like a meta perspective, right? As you have walked with people in really extreme and dire circumstances, what has that done to shape what you believe about God, what you believe about the world, even what you believe about yourself and people, as you've sat and thousands of people have come through your counseling office and you've walked with them through these really dire circumstances?
Well, since we're talking about pain and dire circumstances, I'd like to put it in the context of wilderness.
Okay.
And talk just a little bit about wilderness. I'm trying to decide how technical to get, and I want to try to keep it as simple as possible. Wilderness is defined as just a hard time.
Yeah.
And if you look even in the history of Israel, after Israel was released from the bondage of slavery of 400 years in Egypt, and they wind up doing the 40 years of wilderness wanderings. There's a lot to unpack there, but I'll leave that there for the moment. And so for Israel, wilderness became pretty synonymous with hard times. Well, here's a fairly new discovery for me. I was listening to a rabbi speak, and this is really important. He said, the Hebrew word for wilderness is God speaks.
That's right.
And it's like, whoa. Say that again, please. And basically it was, the word for wilderness is midbar, to speak is debar, and I'm sure my enunciation and pronunciation is awful, so forgive me of that. And then he basically said that it was literally true for Israel when they were in the wilderness wanderings, but it's also just true in general that God tends to speak in our world wilderness experiences very powerfully and very strongly, but we often, this is now not the rabbi, but we miss the point, because in our wilderness and our wilderness wanderings, our focus primarily goes to making whatever the wilderness is go away as quickly as possible and as painlessly as possible. And once again, the focus is on I want relief, and I need relief, and I must have relief. And so that's where all of our energy goes. And the problem is that we don't hear God speaking in our own wilderness because we're not listening.
Wow.
I talked about this with a friend a little bit ago, and just a couple of weeks ago, and he said something very profound. He said, we need to change the verb. And I'm like, beg your pardon? He said, we need to change the verb, because he was saying, when I'm in the wilderness, my verb is get. God, get me out of here. God, save me. God, rescue me. Well, I mean, that's not bad.
Yeah.
But he said, I bet we miss the point a lot when the verb is get, and we need to change the verb to listen.
Wow.
So if God chooses to get you out of the wilderness, great, fabulous is my point. But let's not. I'll borrow from you a little bit. Let's not waste the wilderness by refusing to listen because God wants to speak. And again, we hear people say all the time, "No pain, no gain," and it's a cliche. By the way, I hate cliches. Because they're just petty.
Yeah, right.
But if we peel back the cliche, I would say of my life, you might say it of your life, that some of the most profound learning has been in wilderness wanderings, when times were really hard. And when we finally learn to ask the question or pray the prayer, God, in my wilderness, what are you trying to teach me?
Yeah.
We then might actually hear what God is trying to speak to us, but our own hyper focus on our pain and our suffering and our tendency to go very inward instead of upward causes us to kind of go deaf. To everything but the shrieks of our own inner suffering. And again, in no way am I putting anybody down that is just kind of deaf by the shrieks of their own inner suffering. No. Would never put anybody down, but just would want to come in and come alongside of and stand with, to the point where in some compassion and empathy, there might also be room for some listening.
Wow.
And then it gets powerful. And then nothing's wasted, and the wilderness isn't wasted. So, good stuff can come out of our suffering.
That's right.
I mean, that's very solid New Testament theology. But, we don't live in a culture. Now I'm going to get myself in trouble. We don't even live in a Christian culture that puts any value on suffering.
Yeah, right.
We've kind of bought, the lie. We've kind of drunk the Kool-Aid that life is supposed to be easy. And if you drink that Kool-Aid and you find yourself in hard times, you feel cheated, you feel that it's unjust, you feel like God hasn't shown up. And instead, again, in the context of a good friend, good counseling, somebody coming alongside that can help you hear the voice of God in the wilderness. When, to kind of paraphrase Brendan Manning, the shadow of Jesus' cross is just drowning out everything else, meaning suffering. That's the shadow of Jesus' cross. And so, any of your listeners out there that are in their wilderness time, the pain, the suffering is real and it's significant, and there's no need to go numb. There's no need to just handle it with busyness or any other way.
Right.
But if you're going to walk through the wilderness and benefit from listening to God in the wilderness, you're probably going to have a different focus than just the alleviation of suffering. I have a picture. We live in a condo, and it's outside my front door. And it's a picture that I took in Antwerp, Belgium. And I was in a cathedral. Everything around it is 1,000 years old. But when I came around this last corner, Deanna and I, there was a modern day sculpture. And you can Google it. It's called Man Who Bears the Cross. And it's in Belgium. It's a very modern sculpture. It's not 1,000 years old. The guy's wearing a very modern suit. He's got the cool Ray-Bans on, and it's just it's so starkly different that it's just wow, And the focal point is his hand is outstretched like this, and a larger than life cross is balancing in his hand, and his gaze is upward to the tip of the cross. And it was powerful, because if we will keep our vision on the cross, and if we will orient ourselves to the cross and not just our own suffering, the wilderness will get so much more productive. And that's not a cliche.
Wow. Phew. Man. I'm curious, people who are going to pick up Nothing Is Wasted, the book, they're going to read those couple of chapters where you and I are sitting down and you're helping me wrestle through all of these things and more. And that was such a profound time for me. I may be putting you on the spot for a moment here, and that's okay if there's nothing that comes to mind, but I'm curious your perspective then of either our time together, that was years ago, so I know that was so long ago, but or your perspective on my story, on Amanda's story, on what took place and what God has done through that. The readers are gonna experience my perspective on our time together at length. Sure. But is there anything that comes to mind where you're like, you know what, here's what I remember, here's what I recall about this particular, of the thousands of people that you've had come through off this particular story, this particular case, so to speak. Hey friends, we're just a few short days away from our Nothing Is Wasted book launch event taking place on August 1st here in the Indianapolis area. Now, I know so many of you have followed along with my story and you've been a part of everything we do here at Nothing Is Wasted. And I would love for you to be a part of this incredible event. We're going to celebrate Amanda's life and legacy and the launch of this story, the Nothing Is Wasted message, into the world. But we also know that travel is expensive. Summer's a busy time. And so we want to remove all the barriers from you not being able to be a part of the event. That's why we've figured out a way to offer to you. We've had people ask about this, and we've figured out a way to offer to you, our Nothing Is Wasted community, a way to join us from wherever you are, no matter where you're at in the country. You can be a part of the live streaming of the book launch event. You can now get a virtual launch event ticket for only $15. And you can be a part of this meaningful night as we share the Nothing Is Wasted story with the world. So even though you can't be in the room right there, you can live stream this for only $15 wherever you're at. Now, the night's going to include interactive storytelling, a live podcast recording with me and Christy and our good friends Daniel and Brittany Brooker. And you'll even get to hear me read a portion of the book in I'm telling you, a powerful and creative way that you're not going to want to miss. Even though you're not going to be able to be a part of the food trucks and the other things that we have available for the entire event, you will get to be a part of the programming for this live streaming. So we want you to be on your computer or in front of your TV, piping this in from wherever you're at. Now, I would love for you to be there in person, but I understand it's very difficult. And so we wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to celebrate the launch of Nothing Is Wasted with us. So in order to get your virtual book launch event tickets, go to nothingiswastedbook.com, click the link launch event, and follow the promptings to the virtual ticket. And then plan to join us at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, August 1st, as you live stream this incredible event that we have planned. I cannot wait to celebrate with you. Even if we can't do it in person, I can't wait to do it with you wherever you're at. Go to nothingiswastedbook.com, get your $15 virtual ticket, and join us Thursday, August 1st for the book launch event.
I do have some recollections. I guess I would put it this way. The title of your book is not good marketing. The title of your book is Truth.
Yeah.
And frankly, Davey, I wouldn't want to read your book if all the tragedy wasn't connected to it. Not because I'm a voyeur,
right,
and just want to, see all of your pain. No, but there's an authenticity and a genuineness that can only come through the suffering.
Yeah.
And we don't talk about that very much beyond the cliche level. You know, I know God's going to do something great with this. And, you know, I'm not trying to put anybody down when I say that, but even that person doesn't have a clue what they're saying most of the time.
Right.
And when I look back at your story, first, the word tragedy comes to mind. And that's just not even scratching the surface. What's a word for catastrophic, beyond unbelievable, incredible, horrific suffering? I don't know what that word is. Yeah. Maybe you do, but I don't know what that word is. So tragedy is an understatement is all I'm trying to say. I think the next phrase that comes to my mind would be complexity. In your story, it was so complex. Because of the tragedy and all the implications of that tragedy and everything that was happening inside of you, it was very, very complex. But here's the deal. The complexity informed you. If you would have skipped the process of complexity, I'm fine. You know, this was hard, but I'm good.
Yeah.
You would have skipped the step of complexity. And here's the deal. We all want simple.
Right.
That's cool.
Right.
But if you skip the piece of complexity, the simplicity then that follows is uninformed. And not helpful, not therapeutic, not powerful. It's cliche.
Yeah.
It's the 3 points and you're done. You know, if you just do these 3 things, it'll all be over and it'll all be good. Now, so tragedy, complexity that ultimately led to simplicity.
Yeah.
But the complexity informed the simplicity. That gave you something to hang on to and something to hold to, which then, and this is the big word, led to transformation. And transformation is a change of stage. You know, transformation isn't just a change like the weather's changed. The weather's transformed? No.
Yeah.
Transformation is to go from one stage to another stage. And that's what happened to you is when you were able to gain some understanding and the complexity informed the simplicity, then you were able to find purpose,
Right.
like you're realizing right now.
Right.
And then in that purpose is where I think the transformation process happened, because I would put it this way. God never calls without first equipping and preparing. And everybody out there, take a deep breath, because sometimes that means we go through hard times.
Yeah.
Very hard times. And those hard times are meant to inform us, not punish us. They're meant to guide us. They're meant to change us.
Yeah.
And then when you can grab onto the simplicity of that is where real change starts to take place.
Yeah.
You know, what you may remember me saying this, maybe I never said it to you, but one of the things I hate in life all the time, and I've said it to so many people, the odds are you've heard it.
Probably.
I hate psychobabble.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And now everybody's got to buckle up, because there's one thing I hate more than psychobabble. I don't know if you remember or not. It's Christian psychobabble.
Yeah.
You see, because Christian psychobabble, oh gosh, audience, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not being a heretic. Because nobody intends to do Christian psychobabble. But when, see, the tragedy is met with 3 simple points and we're done. And it skips the complexity of what the individual is experiencing. And when that then does not inform the 3 or 4 simple things that would actually make a huge difference, you get cliches in the simplicity. and the transformation in the wilderness doesn't happen. Now, I know the Holy Spirit doesn't need our help, but often the Holy Spirit asks for our help.
Yeah.
To partner with him in the journey,
Yeah.
to partner with him in the application. And so, for so many, the purpose of tragedy gets missed.
Yeah.
And again, I would never wish tragedy on anybody. And so please don't mishear me, audience. I'm not saying sign up for your next tragedy. You know, the 801 course. Of course not. Of course not. Of course not. But it's also naive to think there's no trouble in this world.
Right.
There's a lot of trouble in this world.
Yeah.
Well, if you ask me to go through pain without a purpose, I'm not going to be terribly gung-ho about that. I may not be terribly gung-ho if you give me a purpose, but at least I'll hang in there.
Yeah.
To the point where lessons are learned, and they're God lessons. They're not psychobabble lessons. And transformation takes place. And while I would never, ever, ever, and I'm assuming you would never, ever, ever want to repeat the events of 7 or 8 years ago, you can recognize the purpose in it and the transformation that's taken place.
Yeah.
And that doesn't justify the tragedy, and that doesn't make the tragedy okay. But then you have some gold you're hanging on to that could only come out of the tragedy.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I would say one of the reasons why I get pastors is because I are one. So I am a pastor, and I know what it's like to be beat up in ministry.
Yeah.
Because I was. But we won't digress. But it's the same way now that God wants, and I would say this to your listening audience, God wants to redeem your tragedy.
Yeah.
He's not punishing you with your tragedy. He wants to redeem your tragedy, but he also wants to teach you because God speaks in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And it's all about transformation. You know, and remember the word from an hour ago. Sometimes the lessons of God appear in the moment very counterintuitive. And so it takes some heroic courage and some relentless faith and some unshakable hope and a teachable spirit to be able to hang in there in hard times, to actually learn the God lessons. That unfortunately often can't be taught outside of tragedy. So I'm not justifying tragedy, I'm not elevating tragedy, but I'm saying purpose in tragedy helps us take a deep breath and get on with life.
Yeah.
No purpose, pointless.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pointless.
Man, Doc.
So I don't know if that answers your question. I hope that answers your
absolutely
question.
answers my question. Dr. Walker, this has been incredible. I wish we could sit here and talk for hours about this. It's really just a joy to hear the wisdom that comes from your mouth and, you know, the timeliness of what you're saying in all of our lives. Everybody who's watching this or listening to this. And I think what's important to underscore, I won't go into this. We don't have much time left to be able to go into it, but you know, 7, 8 years ago, the last time you and I spoke, since then, you've gone through quite a bit of crisis in your own life, difficulty in your own life. And so this is so much more meaningful, I'm sure, even for you as you're expressing this. It's really meaningful for me to hear you talk about this after knowing what you've gone through over the past 7, 8 years. And that's because it's true. And that's
because it's true.
It's standing the test of time.
Yeah.
It is pervasive no matter what you're going through. This is truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's truth with a big T, you know, a capital T truth, God's truth.
Yeah. True. Well, Dr. Walker, thank you so much. This has just been such a blessing. And I, no pun intended on that one, with the Blessing Ranch, but I'm telling you, you have been such an important part of my journey, and I'm so grateful. I don't know if I'll ever be able to express to you how grateful I am for you. And I know that this has been such a wonderful, wonderful conversation for other people to listen into. And I know they're being impacted by it right now. So thank you for your life. Thank you for your legacy, for your ministry. And I want to make sure everybody gets connected to the Blessing Ranch, especially if you're a pastor, you're a ministry leader. Tell us where we can get connected to more of what's going on.
blessingranch.org.
All right.
There's an awful lot going on right now. One of the things I'm most excited about is Charity and I published the book Unhindered about 4 years ago. Some study guides and, a little easier to digest version of Unhindered was also published. But what I'm most excited about is what's called the UCI, the Unhindered Clinical Instrument. It's a 6-year process for us that takes everything we've been talking about. And remember, one of the points is understanding.
Yeah.
There's 6 main categories and 54 subscales.
Wow.
It's psychometrically accurate.
Wow.
It's an amazing tool to try to understand some of the things that have shaped your hearts, some of the things that have affected perspective, some of the things that set our normal, and then gives a pathway of how to go beyond all that.
Wow.
So you can find the Unhindered Clinical Instrument on the Blessing Ranch, blessingranch.org website, and give them a call, inquire. They'll guide you through the inquiry process.
And hopefully when you give them a call, Charity won't give Dr. Walker a call because he is retired right now. And so this is the extent of what you're going to hear from Dr. Walker.
Yeah. So it's been Dr. Byers for about the last 12 years. Dr. Charity Byers. So she's doing a great job.
Awesome.
And her staff. There's a lot of others that work with Blessing Ranch now. So Davey, it's been great to connect with you.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you so much.
Well, I can see why you brought it on. I keep wanting to call him your therapist, Dr. John Walker, your colleague, your friend. I mean, your mentor. All those things. What a wise man and a healer, and amazing to think about. Even just what you told us before, the way that God really ordained that connection, and then his availability and his insight to you. I'm so grateful that God put him in your life at the perfect time, and that you were able to share him with our Nothing is Wasted community, because I know that really ministered to them. So thank you so much for that. And thank you, Dr. John Walker, for being here. That was incredible, Davey.
Yeah, it was. So, there's 2 full chapters in the book about our time together, and just the way it really shifted things for me.
Yeah.
And so, and when we walk through, the book, it, like, you as the reader, you're reading this, it's a memoir style, right? So it's almost like you're reading a novel is what it feels like. It's not like me teaching you. It's like you discovering it with me, because he's teaching us this stuff.
Oh, it's gonna
so
be
that's
so
the
good.
way it reads. And so you're going to actually feel like you're sitting in the room with Dr. John Walker as he's walking you through all of these really big paradigm shifts and aha moments in my healing journey. So it's really special, and I'm grateful for Dr. Walker for being such a pivotal part of that journey. You can go and get your copy of the book. It's on Amazon. It's on
wherever books are sold.
Right. Wherever books are sold.
Now is the moment. Oh, that's so exciting. Yeah,
that's
very
right.
exciting.
So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, nothingiswastedbook.com. Go get your copy of the book. We'd love for you to pick up a copy. So while you're doing that, go ahead and follow us on Instagram, Nothing is Wasted Ministries. You can follow me at Davey Blackburn. You can follow Aubrey at ObSamp. And we want to thank Sleeping at Last for providing all the music for the Nothing is Wasted podcast. You can download or stream his music anywhere music can be downloaded and streamed. And next week, we've got another special conversation that is we have reserved for this book launch series. And so we want to invite you to tune in for that. Go ahead and listen to a little clip from that conversation. One of the things that really impacted me early on is after everything began to subside and people started going back to their lives, and I really found myself in some really deep places of grief and depression. You and I we had a few conversations. We specifically had some conversations around some of the things that people were saying in like different forums, Reddit forums, comments, you know, that it was so difficult to grieve in front of the entire public, and then to have everybody else impute their own opinions on how I was grieving or what we were doing or what we were saying. But you just had a really clear head about all of it. You know, I'm just kind of curious as you saw that perspective play out, how that impacted you. You know, as you saw the things that were happening, you've got a real sense of justice. One of the things that I feel like is you're just such a protector around the relationships that you have. But what really helped you, just because you helped me stay pretty level-headed in that, what helped you to stay level-headed in the midst of all of that?
Man, I think that when I was talking to you, I was pretty level-headed. When I was talking to Sherry about it, she was helping me right-size some of those thoughts, because you just mentioned, I'm an Enneagram 8, justice, what's wrong needs to be made right. And those things in my mind, you know, what happened to Amanda, there was no earthly way to make right what the wrongs that were done. And then also, you know, as you're doing interviews and, you know, God is getting the glory for this, there's no other way to say it for me. There's like keyboard warriors they're grading you on your interview of when people are asking you about Amanda and the story and what God's doing in it. And they've got a clipboard out grading how you're responding, as if they have any perspective or clue on what it's like to experience what you've experienced. Now, let's go back to what we say all the time, right? It doesn't make sense to compare pain. So everybody's experienced pain, but I don't sit back, especially now, and I don't try to backseat drive on when somebody's experienced the loss of a loved one, or they've gone through a divorce, or they found out infidelity's been happening, and try to say, oh, they're not responding correctly. They're not like who am I to project onto anyone else how they should respond, and the unique work that God is doing in their life, has been doing, is currently doing, and will continue to do in their life. And so, you know, I was trying to take all of my emotions, get them out of the way, and then be able to talk with you and say, hey man, like, you know who you are. You know who you are. You are David James Blackburn. Like, you know who you are. You know that you love Jesus. You know where your heart is. You know you've fought for purity in your life. You know you have fought for intimacy with God. You know that you loved Amanda more than this world itself. Like, you know, like, so don't let any of those things that anybody else is saying, like, don't let them interrupt what God has already said about you. And, you know, there's probably somebody listening right now that, you know, they're letting social media drive the narrative of how they feel about themselves. And I would just remind them today that, like, you are who God says you are. You're not who the world says that you are, or what someone else thinks about you, or you are who God says. You're a child of God. You're a son or daughter of the Most High King.
That's great. That's so good.
Hey friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.